When the guards grabbed her arm, the boy screamed so loud the whole lobby froze. His tiny hands clung to her jacket, begging them not to take her away. The HR manager ordered them out, voice sharp, cold. And just as the door swung open, a man in a gray coat stepped in, and everything stopped. Before we begin, please like, subscribe and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Globe showing Europe, Africa, United States, Canada, UK, Australia, Jamaica. In the narrow kitchen of a 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of Pittsburgh, Tessa Calder boiled coffee that had gone slightly stale from being stretched too long. The sun wasn't even up yet, but the apartment already hummed with the soft noise of a life that had learned to survive on routine. Her 6-year-old son, Eli, sat on the counter kicking his heels gently, watching her pack the same peanut butter sandwich he'd taken every day that week. "Mom, do you think you'll get this one?" he asked. His voice was hopeful, unaware of how heavy that question had become. Tessa smiled, the kind of smile that knew too much. "I have to, baby." It had been 6 months since she'd lost her job at a logistics firm when their department was cut. Since then, every application felt like sending a message into a void. She'd done everything right, clean resume, practiced answers, ironed clothes, but there was something about being a single mom that seemed to put her one step behind every time. This morning was supposed to be different. She'd finally gotten a call back from Elridge Systems, one of the more respected companies in downtown Pittsburgh. She'd read about their flexible work culture, their focus on family values. It sounded like the kind of place that might understand her. But at 6:40 a.m., just as she zipped up her coat and handed Eli his backpack, her phone buzzed. It was the babysitter, the only babysitter, texting that she couldn't make it. Stomach flu. No backup. No family nearby. For a few long seconds, Tessa just stood there, coat half-zipped, staring at the message. She thought about rescheduling, but she knew what that meant. Another lost opportunity. Another polite rejection email that said, "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." So she made a choice, one she didn't want to make. She took Eli's hand and said softly, "You're coming with me." Downtown Pittsburgh buzzed with the rhythm of early spring. The sidewalks glistened faintly from last night's rain. Tessa held Eli's hand tightly as they crossed the street toward the tall glass building that seemed to shine too brightly for anyone like her. Inside the lobby, the air smelled like expensive coffee and polished ambition. People in suits moved with purpose. Tessa tried not to look nervous. She kept her son close, whispering reminders to stay quiet, to sit still, to be patient. The receptionist at the front desk smiled at first, until she noticed Eli. Then the expression changed. The kind of polite, practiced smile that hides judgment underneath. "Interview?" she asked. Tessa nodded. "Yes, 9 a.m. with Human Resources." Tessa called her. The receptionist's eyes flickered again toward the child. "Oh, all right. Please have a seat." It wasn't rude, not exactly. Just uncomfortable. Enough to make Tessa wish she could disappear into the chair cushions. They sat near the corner, where Eli started drawing on a scrap of paper she pulled from her purse. Every few minutes, she'd glance at her watch, silently praying no one would say anything. But luck didn't last long. At 9:03, the glass door to HR opened, and Vanessa Holt, polished, poised, and perfectly composed, stepped out holding a clipboard. She scanned the room, spotted Tessa, and smiled thinly. "Ms. Calder?" Tessa stood up quickly, tucking Eli's paper away. "Yes, that's me." Vanessa's eyes landed on Eli. The smile vanished. "And this is?" "My son," Tessa said carefully. "I had a childcare emergency this morning, but he'll sit quietly. I promise." The silence that followed was sharp. Vanessa blinked slowly, clearly unamused. "I see. Unfortunately, company policy doesn't allow minors in the interview area. We need to maintain a professional environment." Tessa's heart sank. "Please, this is my only opportunity." "He won't make a sound. I've waited weeks for this interview." Vanessa adjusted her glasses, her tone soft but final. "I understand, Miss Calder, but I can't make exceptions. It wouldn't be fair to the other candidates." Eli looked up from his sketchbook, sensing the tension. "Mom." Tessa felt her throat tighten. She nodded to him, trying to keep it together. "It's okay, sweetheart." But it wasn't. Not really. Because as she stood there in her carefully ironed suit, holding the hand of the only person in the world who depended on her, she realized the world didn't care about effort. It cared about image. And in that spotless lobby, she didn't fit the image. Vanessa gave her a polite nod toward the exit. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience." Tessa hesitated, humiliated. She could feel the eyes of the other applicants on her, sharp, pitying, curious. The kind of eyes that burn long after you leave a room. Her palms shook as she turned toward the door, her son's small hand clutched in hers. But before stepping out, she looked back, not at Vanessa, but at the polished glass walls and the people inside who would never know what it cost just to get there. It wasn't anger that filled her chest. It was exhaustion. The kind that sits deep in your bones when life keeps reminding you that trying isn't enough. For a moment, she considered walking out and pretending none of it happened. But deep down, she knew this moment would follow her, every rejection, every time someone called her unreliable for being a mother. It was the same story told over and over in different buildings. And for many watching, it might sound familiar. If you've ever been told you can't have both, your child and your chance, then you already understand her pain. And if that truth stings even a little, then don't just scroll past it. Because what happens next will make you question who really deserves the second chance. That morning, as the glass door closed behind her, Tessa had no idea that someone else had seen everything, and that within the hour, her story would collide with the one man capable of changing it. Outside the glass doors of Elridge Systems, the air felt colder than it had 5 minutes earlier. Tessa stood on the sidewalk with her son, clutching the folder that held her resume, the one she'd reprinted twice because the first copies had smudges. The street buzzed with the sound of buses, crosswalk beeps, and voices of people who belonged somewhere. She didn't. Not right now. Eli tugged her sleeve. "Mom, are we leaving?" She nodded, forcing a steady breath. "Yeah, buddy. We're leaving." They started walking toward the parking lot, her heels tapping too loudly against the concrete. The rhythm reminded her of every no she'd ever heard, each one sounding the same, polite but dismissive. She'd been through worse. She'd picked herself up before. But this one hit differently. Maybe because her son had seen it. Because he'd watched her be dismissed not for lack of skill, but for daring to exist as both capable and human. As they reached the corner of the lot, Tessa knelt to zip his coat. "You did great in there," she said softly. "I'm proud of you." Eli frowned. "But they were mean." She smiled again, the same practiced smile that adults use to protect children from truths too heavy to explain. Inside the building, Vanessa Holt stood near the reception desk, clicking her pen repeatedly. She hated uncomfortable scenes. They left smudges on her carefully ordered day. "Let's just move on," she told Kevin, her assistant. "We'll bring in the next candidate in 5 minutes." Kevin nodded, though he kept glancing toward the door as if the silence outside still echoed through the glass. Vanessa returned to her office to gather the next file. She didn't notice the elevator doors sliding open behind her. Warren Elridge stepped out, coat folded over his arm, tie slightly loosened. He wasn't the kind of man people expected when they heard the word millionaire. He drove himself, answered his own calls, and disliked formal greetings. His staff respected him quietly, partly from admiration, partly from the mystery of never knowing exactly what he was thinking. He had spent the morning at a client meeting across town. He'd come back early, hoping to review a few project proposals before the board meeting. The lobby, however, was not as calm as usual. He noticed a young receptionist trying to look busy, eyes darting toward the doors. "Morning," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Elridge," she replied quickly. He caught the tension in her voice. Years of managing people had taught him how to hear the things no one said out loud. Something happen? Before she could answer, the elevator chimed again. Vanessa emerged from the hallway, tablet in hand, perfectly composed until she saw him standing there. "Oh, Mr. Elridge. I didn't realize you were back." "I noticed someone leaving the building upset," he said casually, but his tone carried weight. "Everything all right?" Vanessa hesitated. "Yes. Just an interview that didn't fit our standards. He raised an eyebrow. Our standards? She smoothed her blazer. A candidate brought her child to the interview. Company policy doesn't permit that, of course. We had to ask her to leave. Warren's eyes shifted toward the glass doors. Through them, he could still see the woman and her small son walking down the sidewalk. The child held her hand tightly, looking up as she talked to him. Something about the scene, the quiet defeat, the unspoken explanation between them, hit him in a place he rarely let himself feel. He turned back. "What's her name?" Vanessa blinked. "Excuse me?" "The applicant. What was her name?" "Tessa Calder, I believe." He nodded once, then walked past her toward the reception desk. "Schedule the next interview for 10 minutes later," he said. "Sir, we're already behind." He didn't stop walking. 10 minutes. Vanessa looked at Kevin, confused. He shrugged. They'd both learned long ago that when Warren said something, he meant it. Outside, Tessa sat in her car staring at the steering wheel. Eli had already climbed into the back seat, kicking his legs gently, humming the tune from a cartoon he liked. She should have cried, but the tears wouldn't come. She was too tired for that kind of release. Instead, she just sat there, letting the silence settle. She thought about every decision that had led her here, quitting college to raise her son, working double shifts, saving up to finish her degree online. It was supposed to add up to something. But every time she got close, life reminded her that being a single mother wasn't considered ambition, it was considered baggage. She didn't notice the tall man who had just stepped outside the building and stopped near the curb, watching quietly. Warren Elridge recognized her immediately. The same woman from the lobby. The one who hadn't shouted or pleaded, just held her ground until there was no ground left to stand on. He saw the way she leaned forward against the steering wheel, eyes closed, taking a breath that looked like surrender. He thought about his own mother, who had raised him alone after his father left. He remembered the way she used to hold her composure in public, only letting herself break behind closed doors. It was the same look on this woman's face. Without saying a word, he went back inside. In the HR office, Vanessa was mid-sentence when the door opened again. Warren stepped in and handed her his coat. "Cancel the rest of the interviews for the marketing position." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Sir, I'll be handling that hire personally." "But, Mr. Elridge, that's highly irregular. We've already shortlisted several qualified." He looked directly at her. "Do it." His tone wasn't harsh. It was final. Vanessa swallowed. "Of course." He left the room, leaving a strange quiet behind him. Kevin leaned over and whispered, "What just happened?" Vanessa didn't answer. She was too busy replaying the morning, realizing the conversation in the lobby hadn't been as private as she'd hoped. Meanwhile, Tessa finally started the car. The heater kicked in with a soft hum. Eli was still drawing in the back seat, humming to himself. She glanced in the rearview mirror and felt a sharp twist of guilt. He deserved better than this. A mother who could give him stability, not one who kept dragging him through moments like these. At a stoplight, her phone buzzed again. She ignored it at first, assuming it was another spam message or automated job posting. But when it rang a second time, she glanced down. A known number. Pittsburgh area code. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello. Ms. Calder?" a calm male voice asked. "This is Warren Elridge from Elridge Systems." She froze. "Hello, sir. I believe there may have been a misunderstanding earlier today," he said. "If you're available tomorrow morning, I'd like you to come in for a follow-up conversation. Just you this time." Her fingers tightened on the phone. "Of course. Thank you. I'll be there." "Good," he said simply, then hung up. Tessa sat in stunned silence, heart pounding, unsure whether she'd just imagined the entire exchange. In the back seat, Eli looked up. "Mom? Who was that?" She smiled faintly, still processing. Maybe the second chance. That night, while the city slept under the pale glow of streetlights, the man who made the call couldn't shake her face from his mind. By morning, he'd learned something buried deep inside her resume, something that would change how he saw her forever. Morning light spilled through the blinds of Tessa's apartment, soft and uncertain. She hadn't slept much. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed the moment the man introduced himself on the phone. Warren Elridge. The name wasn't unfamiliar. She'd read it before, printed in the business section of the Pittsburgh Tribune, attached to a list of the city's top employers. She couldn't understand why he'd called her. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he wanted to explain the company policy again, politely this time. Still, something in his tone had felt different. Not corporate, not distant. Just real. By 6 a.m., she was already dressed, her resume printed again and tucked neatly in a folder. She'd managed to find a neighbor, Mrs. Lang, to watch Eli for the morning. The woman's kindness felt like a small miracle. As she thanked her, she silently prayed this would be worth it. The drive downtown felt longer than usual. She didn't play the radio. She needed the silence to think, to breathe, to stop herself from imagining every possible way this could go wrong. When she arrived at Elridge Systems, the same glass building she'd left humiliated just 24 hours earlier, she paused outside the door. The same security guard was there. He gave her a small nod, polite but curious. Maybe he recognized her from yesterday. Maybe he was wondering why she'd come back. The receptionist greeted her again, a little more cautiously this time. "Good morning, Ms. Calder. You're expected. Please take the elevator to the top floor." Top floor. Not HR this time. Tessa's stomach fluttered as the elevator ascended. Each soft ding marked another story, another layer of nerves. When the doors opened, she stepped into a quiet hallway lined with framed photos, images of the company's early years, old employees, awards for community work. The air felt different up here. Still professional but warmer. At the end of the hall, a man stood near the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the skyline. He turned when she approached. Warren Elridge was taller than she remembered, his expression calm, observant. He didn't greet her with formality. Instead, he gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." She did. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the folder on the table. He looked at it, then back at her. "You don't need that," he said. "I've read your file." For a moment, she wasn't sure what to say. Warren continued, his voice steady but thoughtful. He explained that he'd seen what happened yesterday, that he didn't agree with how it was handled. He spoke about how companies often say they value family, yet forget what that actually looks like in real life. As she listened, her guard began to lower, not because she felt safe, but because someone was finally acknowledging what she'd spent years hiding behind politeness and apologies. He asked her about her experience, her past roles, and the gaps in her resume. She explained them honestly. The 2-year pause after Eli was born. The part-time administrative work that never quite covered the bills. The night classes she took to finish her degree. Most people looked at those years like red marks, signs of instability. But Warren didn't. He asked real questions. Not about what she'd lost, but about what she'd learned. When the conversation ended, he told her something that left her speechless. He wasn't offering her a job yet, not out of pity, not out of charity, but because he believed she deserved a fair chance to compete. He wanted her to come back the next week for a proper interview, this time with the department head. And if she got the job, it would be because she earned it. Tessa left that office with a strange feeling she hadn't known in months: hope. That week, she spent every spare minute preparing. She practiced answers in front of her mirror, rehearsed confidence she didn't feel yet, and reread everything she could about Elridge Systems. It wasn't just about getting the job anymore. It was about proving that mothers like her, the ones who carried both work and home on the same shoulders, could still rise. When she returned the following Monday, something subtle had changed. The receptionist smiled more genuinely this time. Vanessa from HR nodded politely, avoiding direct eye contact. During the interview, Tessa spoke clearly and with quiet determination. She didn't embellish or exaggerate. She talked about her work ethic, her problem-solving, her ability to multitask, all skills sharpened not just by her past jobs, but by motherhood itself. By the time she left, she didn't know if she'd done enough. But she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. That night, after tucking Eli into bed, she sat at the kitchen table under the soft glow of a lamp. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge. She thought about everything that had led her here, the exhaustion, the rejection, the moments of almost giving up. Then her phone buzzed. The email came at 9:47 p.m. She stared at it for a long moment, almost afraid to open it. When she finally did, the words blurred slightly from the tears in her eyes. "We are pleased to offer you the position of marketing assistant at Elridge Systems." The message went on, listing details, salary, start date. But she barely registered any of it. All she could see were those first few words, "We are pleased to offer you." It wasn't just a job. It was validation. It was proof that resilience still mattered, even in a world that often overlooked quiet strength. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, trying not to wake her son. He would find out in the morning. For now, she just sat there, letting the relief wash over her. Some stories aren't about miracles. They're about moments when someone finally sees you, not as a mistake, not as a burden, but as enough. And if you've ever waited for that moment, then you understand her silence right now. If this part of her journey makes you feel something, stay with it. Because what comes next isn't the ending you expect. By the end of that week, Tessa walked into her first day at Elridge Systems with a small paper bag lunch and her ID badge clipped neatly to her blouse. She didn't know it yet, but the man who had given her that second chance was about to face a decision that would test what kind of leader and what kind of human he really was. Tessa Calder never forgot her first morning walking into Elridge Systems as an employee rather than a hopeful applicant. The lobby still looked the same: polished floors, quiet conversations, and people carrying coffee cups like small trophies of survival. But this time, the security guard nodded at her with recognition, not suspicion. It felt different. It felt earned. Her desk sat in a quiet corner of the marketing department, close enough to hear the hum of conversation but far enough to think clearly. The first week, she mostly observed how people talked, who carried authority, which moments mattered and which ones passed unnoticed. She noticed everything. Years of being underestimated had trained her to. Her supervisor, a woman named Brianna Cook, was efficient but fair. She gave Tessa clear tasks, quick deadlines, and little praise. It didn't bother her. She wasn't there for approval. She was there to build something steady, something her son could depend on. Every morning, she dropped Eli off at school, then drove to work with a small thermos of coffee balanced in the cup holder. Every night, she cooked dinner while reviewing project notes on her laptop. Her life wasn't easy, but it finally had rhythm. By the end of her third week, she had completed a full reorganization of the department's client tracking system, something that had been delayed for months. When Brianna presented it during the Monday meeting, she gave credit where it was due. "That was Tessa's idea," she said, glancing across the room. "Clean, simple, and effective." The room turned toward her. For a moment, she froze. Compliments had never been comfortable. She nodded politely, smiling the way people do when they're afraid to take up too much space. After the meeting, an older colleague stopped by her desk. "You're sharp," he said with a friendly grin. "Glad they hired you." She smiled back, her heart quietly swelling with gratitude. It wasn't about being noticed. It was about belonging. But belonging, she would soon learn, came with its own risks. One afternoon, while updating client files, she noticed an old database folder marked archived billing issues. It wasn't part of her task, but her natural habit to tidy up took over. She began organizing it, renaming files, sorting old entries. That's when she saw something strange, a string of invoices under a small startup's account, numbers that didn't add up. The company, Maple and Finch Creative, had been charged twice for the same service 3 months apart. She didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was a clerical error. But when she double-checked the audit trail, she saw that someone had manually edited the billing entries after they were closed. The name attached to those edits was familiar: Vanessa Holt, the same HR manager who had dismissed her at the interview weeks ago. Tessa sat back, frowning. She hadn't been looking for trouble, but the discovery sat heavy in her gut. Maybe it was nothing, a mistake, a glitch. But maybe it wasn't. And if it wasn't, then it was more than her job on the line. She spent the next hour quietly reviewing other archived files. The pattern repeated. Small discrepancies, scattered across different accounts, all signed under the same approval credentials. It wasn't a fortune, but enough to raise questions. By the time she packed up to leave that evening, the building was mostly empty. The office lights dimmed automatically at 7, leaving the soft hum of computers and the glow of city lights through the windows. She could have ignored it, just clocked out and gone home to read Eli a bedtime story. But something about it bothered her. Maybe because she'd seen what silence costs. Maybe because she couldn't stand watching someone use power the way it had once been used against her. She printed 3 sample invoices, tucked them in her folder, and drove home in silence. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about the delicate balance she'd built. This job, this security. Speaking up could destroy it. Staying quiet could make her complicit. The memory of that morning weeks ago, the humiliation, the quiet tears she'd fought in her car, came rushing back. She'd promised herself that if she ever got the chance, she'd never let anyone else be made small in the name of professionalism. And yet here she was, facing that same choice again. By morning, she made her decision. When she arrived at the office the next day, she walked past HR without stopping. She went straight to the top floor. The receptionist at the executive level hesitated when she saw her. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Tessa said, her voice calm but steady. "But I think Mr. Elridge will want to see me." The woman hesitated, then called ahead. Moments later, the door opened. Warren looked up from his desk, surprised but not displeased. "Ms. Calder," he said. "Is everything all right?" Tessa stepped forward and placed the printed invoices on his desk. She explained what she'd found, carefully, factually, without accusation. Just truth. He listened silently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he studied the papers for a long time. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing something he hadn't before. "Thank you," he said finally. "Leave these with me." That was all. No promise, no reassurance. Just acknowledgement. Tessa nodded and left, unsure if she'd just done something brave or reckless. The day passed slowly. People worked as usual, unaware of what had been set in motion. Vanessa crossed her path twice in the hallway, her expression neutral, perfectly composed. By late afternoon, Warren had quietly requested an internal audit. He didn't tell anyone why. He didn't have to. Within 2 days, the results were clear. The discrepancies were real. The approvals traced back directly to Vanessa's department. The evidence was undeniable. Warren called her into his office that Friday. The meeting was private, brief, and final. By the time Tessa arrived at work Monday morning, Vanessa's nameplate was gone from the HR door. No one said anything out loud, but whispers traveled fast. People speculated, questioned, pieced together half-truths. Tessa stayed quiet. She wasn't interested in gossip. She was just relieved it was over. Or so she thought. That evening, as she packed her things to leave, she found a folded note on her desk. No name. Just 6 words in neat handwriting. "Some people don't stay lucky forever." She froze, pulse quickening. The hallway was empty. The lights flickered once as the motion sensors reset. She looked around, heart pounding, realizing this wasn't over, not yet. That night, when she walked to her car under the gray Pennsylvania sky, a pair of headlights lingered too long in her rearview mirror. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, just a coincidence. But the next morning, when she opened her inbox, she knew someone was still watching. The following morning began like any other, at least, that's what Tessa told herself. But when she parked outside the Elridge Systems building, her stomach twisted with unease. The note from the night before still sat folded in her purse, its words echoing in her mind. Some people don't stay lucky forever. She didn't know who left it. Maybe someone loyal to Vanessa. Maybe someone who thought she'd crossed a line. Either way, the message was clear. She'd stepped into something bigger than she realized. Inside, the office buzzed with its usual rhythm. Phones rang, printers hummed, the coffee machine hissed softly in the break room. Everyone acted normal, which somehow made it worse. By noon, she had convinced herself to focus on work. She couldn't let paranoia undo the progress she'd made. Not now. Not after everything. But around 2 p.m., she received an email marked urgent. Meeting request, 3 p.m. The sender, Warren Elridge. Her hands trembled slightly as she clicked it. The message was brief. Please meet me in conference room B. Bring your ID badge. Her ID badge? That part chilled her. For the next hour, time dragged painfully. Her mind filled with every possibility. Maybe she was being questioned. Maybe someone had twisted the story. Maybe her honesty had turned into a problem. When the clock struck 3, she walked to the conference room, steadying her breath with each step. The room was quiet when she entered. Warren sat at the head of the table, a few folders in front of him. Another man was seated across from him, an older gentleman she didn't recognize, dressed in a navy suit. Tessa, Warren said, his tone calm but serious. This is Richard Mohn, our company's legal counsel. Her heart sank. Richard nodded politely. Please, have a seat. Tessa sat down, clutching her folder in her lap. Warren spoke first. I wanted to bring you in personally because I believe in transparency. The internal audit confirmed everything you found. The financial discrepancies were traced directly to Vanessa's authorization. She's no longer with the company. He paused, studying her expression. However, there's another matter we need to address. Tessa felt her throat tighten. Richard cleared his throat and continued. When HR reprocessed your hiring file during the audit, we discovered a background check note that hadn't been finalized before you were hired. It appears that 2 years ago, during your time at Westridge Logistics, there was a clerical issue involving a vendor billing error under your login credentials. Her heart sank. That was a system glitch, she said quietly. I explained it to my supervisor at the time. They verified it wasn't my fault. Richard nodded. Yes, we confirmed that. The issue was later resolved, but the documentation wasn't transferred when the company merged. It just looked incomplete on paper. The relief that hit her was sharp enough to make her dizzy. Warren leaned forward slightly. I wanted to hear it directly from you. Honesty matters here. She met his eyes. I wouldn't risk everything I've worked for, not after coming this far. I've made mistakes, sure, but never the kind that hurt someone else. He nodded slowly, the tension in his expression easing. There was a moment of silence, heavy but not hostile. Then he spoke again, softer this time. You took a risk coming forward, Tessa. Most people would have ignored what they saw. That kind of courage doesn't go unnoticed. She looked down, blinking hard. I just wanted to do what was right. I know, he said. Later that evening, after everyone else had gone home, Warren stood alone in his office watching the rain streak down the window. The city lights blurred through it, a quiet rhythm of movement and meaning. He thought about her, about how she'd walked into that lobby weeks ago holding her son's hand, and how he'd nearly let someone like her slip away because of a rule that didn't deserve to exist. He thought about his own mother again, about how the world had treated her when she'd walked into rooms carrying both love and responsibility. Back then, no one had opened doors for her. She'd forced them open herself. Now, standing in that office years later, he realized he was in the position she never got to have, the one that could make things a little different for someone else. He picked up his phone and typed an internal memo. Effective immediately, Elridge Systems will implement a family accommodation policy for all applicants and employees. Childcare emergencies will not disqualify candidates from interviews or meetings. He reread it twice before sending. It felt small but meaningful, like an apology built into action. The next morning, when Tessa arrived at work, she found an envelope waiting on her desk. Inside was a simple note written in neat handwriting. Integrity builds trust. Trust builds futures. W.E. Below it was a new company memo, printed and signed. She read the first paragraph and felt her throat tighten. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever walked into a room carrying both ambition and responsibility, and had been told that one canceled out the other. She folded the note carefully and tucked it in her purse, where she knew she'd keep it for years. 2 weeks later, on a gray Saturday morning, she took Eli to the park on the south side of Pittsburgh. The air smelled like wet leaves and fresh coffee from a nearby stand. Eli was laughing, chasing pigeons near the fountain, his coat half-zipped and his shoes already muddy. Tessa sat on the bench watching him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, the first real moment of stillness she'd had in months. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about bills or schedules or interviews. She was just breathing. Warren arrived a few minutes later, walking quietly with his usual calm. He'd mentioned wanting to drop off some final paperwork for her new project, a community marketing initiative she'd helped design. He sat beside her, watching Eli dart around the fountain. Neither said much. They didn't need to. After a while, he glanced at her. "You ever think about how fast things change?" She smiled faintly. "Every day." He nodded. "Funny thing is, sometimes change doesn't start with power. It starts with someone brave enough to tell the truth." She looked at him for a long moment, realizing what he meant and how much that truth had changed both their lives. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Two people who'd walked through storms of expectation and fear, finally standing still long enough to recognize that they'd both grown from it. When the sun broke through the clouds, Eli ran up laughing, waving a paper airplane. He handed it to Warren, who smiled and launched it high into the air. It soared far above the park before drifting gently back to the ground. Eli clapped. Tessa laughed softly. And for the first time in a long while, everything felt right. In a world that often measures people by convenience instead of character, sometimes the quietest choices rewrite the loudest rules. She didn't ask for sympathy, she asked for a chance. And the man who gave it to her learned that leadership isn't about power, it's about perspective. In the end, both of them walked away changed, not by luck, but by grace. If stories like this still mean something to you, don't just scroll away. Subscribe. Be part of the reminder that compassion still exists.